In 1907, Evelyn Burke, the heiress of one of Tennessee's richest valleys, lured men into her family's cellar, and they were never seen again. Tonight, we uncover the valley she haunted. But before we go in, tell me, where are you watching from? I want to know which part of the world is brave enough to hear this story. They said Evelyn Burke's family mansion still breathes at night. And if you stand close enough to the cellar door, you'll hear the ones who begged to get out. It's just a rumor now, a whisper traded between travelers and locals who know better than to look too long toward the hills. The old Burke property stands where the fog never clears, wrapped in vines that pull at its windows and sink into its bricks. The walls are hollow, but the house still sounds alive. People say the mansion exhales. Every few hours you can hear it. A faint groan of wood, a rush of air from the cellar steps, as if something underneath is trying to remember how to breathe again. Most of the townsfolk left that valley decades ago. What's left of the Burke estate sits off a forgotten road. No signage, no trespassing notice. Just the remnants of an iron gate that leads to nothing but silence. And yet, there's a weight that lingers there, a feeling that the ground remembers more than it should. In the early 1900s, the Burke name carried power, the kind that could erase questions. The Burkes owned the valley mines, the mills, even the water rights that kept the nearby towns alive. Their mansion was a symbol of wealth, carved into the Tennessee hills, its shadow stretching over the workers' homes below. But by the winter of 1907, whispers began to travel faster than the wind through the hollows. People said they saw lanterns moving across the Burke fields at impossible hours. Men hired for private work never returned. Letters addressed to the estate were sent back unopened, the ink smudged by damp fingerprints. Evelyn Burke was the last daughter of that line. Young, beautiful, always seen in white, her voice so calm that people swore it could quiet storms. Some said she was a recluse. Others claimed she hosted late gatherings, where laughter and piano music drifted through the valley until morning, followed by silence that lasted for days. But what unsettled the town most wasn't her beauty or her wealth. It was the sound that came from the cellar each night. Farmers working late on the lower hills said they could hear it echoing up the valley. A soft rhythm, like knocking, but too steady to be human. A sound that didn't belong to the wind or the house. And then the disappearances began. At first, the missing were miners from the Burke pits, men with no families to claim them. The sheriff wrote it off as accidents, cave-ins, wandering drunks, men who left town to find work elsewhere. But then a schoolteacher vanished after being invited to dine with the Burkes. Then a clerk. Then a traveling preacher who came to bless the estate. No one ever saw them leave. No one saw them again. Those who lived closest to the Burke property told stories of seeing Evelyn standing by the cellar door at dusk, her lantern swinging by her side, her eyes fixed on the trees. They said she would hum the same melody every night, the kind that stuck in your head long after you'd gone to bed. It wasn't long before the valley changed. The workers stopped showing up for their shifts. Shops began to close. Families packed their belongings, leaving only a few words carved into a rail fence at the edge of town. Do not go near the Burkes after sunset. By spring, the mansion was silent. The windows blackened from soot, the orchard unpicked. But anyone who walked near the hill could still hear that slow, steady knocking from somewhere deep underground. And then, years later, a man arrived. A journalist from Knoxville named Thomas Lyle, who claimed he was writing about Appalachian folklore, about stories families told to keep children from wandering too far into the woods. But what he found wasn't folklore. It wasn't rumor. It was Evelyn Burke, and what was left beneath her home. No one dared to question Evelyn Burke, until one man did. And from that night on, the Burke mansion was never silent again. The Burke estate rests on a rise of land cut from the Tennessee hills, too high for farming, too low for glory. Locals called it High Hollow, a slope of clay and limestone where mist gathers like breath on glass. From the main road, you can still see what's left of the gate. 2 stone pillars leaning toward each other, ironwork tangled in vines, a single letter B still clinging to the rust. A narrow drive once wound a mile uphill to the mansion. The road hasn't been cleared in decades. Wild laurel has swallowed it whole. In 1907, it was lined with gas lamps that burned even when no one passed. Miners said the Burkes kept them lit, so the mountain would remember who owned it. Others said the light wasn't for the living at all. Those who came near the property spoke of the air first. It tasted metallic, heavy with coal dust, and the scent of damp wood. Even the wind seemed to move slower there. Birds avoided the orchard. Dogs stopped barking halfway up the hill, turned, and ran home. The mansion itself was a monument to contradiction, grand but suffocating. Built from local stone, it stretched 3 stories high, every window framed with carved cedar. Time has taken the color from the walls, but old photographs show a place far too proud for the valley that fed it. Inside, there were 21 rooms, a ballroom no one danced in, and a cellar that tunneled deeper than the blueprints admitted. Workers hired to maintain the house said they never saw its far end. The corridor bent twice, then vanished into blackness, the air colder with every step. One of them, a carpenter named Amos Dyer, quit halfway through his contract, claiming that the cellar breathed wrong. He wouldn't explain what that meant. He just left his tools by the door and walked 12 miles down the valley before the sun came up. Evelyn Burke was born in that house in 1883, an only child after 2 sons were lost in infancy. Her mother, Margaret, spent years in mourning, dressing the child in white to keep death confused, as she wrote in one of her surviving letters. Her father, Silas Burke, owned the mountain's largest mine, Burke No. 3, where nearly every man in town worked or owed debt. He died when Evelyn was 22. The mine shut down the following winter. That was when the house began to change. People remember Evelyn differently. Some describe her as soft-spoken, polite, almost painfully proper. Others remember the distance in her eyes, as if she listened to a conversation no one else could hear. She was seen walking the orchard path at dusk, holding a lantern even when daylight lingered, stopping at the cellar steps before turning back toward the house. Always the same route, the same hour, the same silence afterward. Children were told to stay away from the property. Yet from the valley, lights could be seen moving through the windows long after midnight. Slow, deliberate, as though someone carried a candle from room to room, searching for something that refused to be found. The mansion's caretaker, an older man named Jonas Reed, kept a diary that survives today in the county archive. His entries begin ordinary, notes about firewood, repairs, deliveries. Then, without warning, the tone changes. The handwriting grows erratic. Miss E requests more mirrors. 7 this week. None to be hung in her room. She says they are for reflection work. I asked no further. Heard tapping again under the floor last night. 2 knocks, then 1. Miss E smiled when I mentioned it. Reed left the property soon after. The Burkes never hired another caretaker. The townspeople avoided the mansion, but its shadow reached them anyway. Every Sunday, the church bell echoed differently, thicker, slower, as if the valley itself were listening for an answer. The miners' wives began leaving salt lines across their doorways. One by one, families moved away, until only a handful remained. Still, the mansion's presence lingered. On cold mornings, smoke rose from its chimneys, even though no one had lit a fire there in months. Travelers on the ridge claimed they could hear a piano playing, soft, steady chords that stopped the moment anyone spoke of them. No official record mentions these things. You won't find them in the courthouse or the local paper. What you will find is a series of missing person notices, all dated between January and April of 1907. Laborers, a teacher, a preacher, a postal clerk, everyone last seen near the Burke property. The sheriff's reports end abruptly, stamped closed due to lack of evidence. But there is one document that survived. A telegram from Knoxville, addressed to the editor, Appalachian Record, dated June 14th, 1907. The message reads only, "Arrived Burke Valley. Locals refuse interviews. Strange lights at estate. Will send full account once access secured. T. Lyle." That was the journalist who would break the silence. Thomas Lyle, age 31, a reporter known for chasing folklore. He was expected back in Knoxville within a week. He never returned. Today, when storms roll through the valley, lightning flashes over the ridge, and for a brief second you can see the outline of that house, its roof sagging, windows hollow, the orchard dead. The cellar door, though. The cellar door still stands. Locals say the wood never rotted. They say the hinges move on their own. The old road is nearly gone. But if you follow the tree line, you'll find the gate. Step through, and you'll hear it. The echo that lives beneath the soil. Steady, patient, older than the house itself. No one knows when it started. No one knows if it ever stopped. That's where Thomas Lyle went in search of his story. And what he found there, according to the few pages left in his journal, was Evelyn Burke waiting for him at the top of the stairs, holding a lantern, asking if he had finally come to listen. Thomas Lyle arrived in the valley on the evening of June 15th, 1907. The train stopped at a station that no longer exists, a single platform swallowed by weeds and quiet. The porter who carried his trunk refused the tip, muttering that the hills didn't want strangers this week. Lyle wrote in his notebook that first night, "The air here feels old. Even the silence carries weight." He rented a small room above the general store and began asking questions, softly at first. Every answer came the same way. A shake of the head, eyes on the ground, a hand gesturing toward the mountain. When he mentioned Evelyn Burke's name, conversation stopped completely. One man left his chair and walked out into the street without paying for his meal. Another crossed himself and said, "Best let her rest, son. The dead don't like to be measured." 2 days later, Lyle hiked the 1.5-mile road toward the estate. The mist was thick enough to hide his boots. He described the forest as quiet but listening. Somewhere ahead, water dripped in a rhythm too steady for rainfall. At the gate he paused. The ironwork trembled in the breeze, though the trees were still. The drive curved out of sight, lined with the skeletal remains of lamp posts. Every fifth step he heard a faint click beneath the soil, metal shifting under pressure, yet no mechanism could be found. By dusk he reached the front doors. Both stood slightly open. A smell of cold ash and rose water drifted from inside. Dust floated in the air like fog trapped indoors. And then he saw her, Evelyn Burke. She appeared at the top of the grand staircase in a pale gown, her hair pinned with small glass beads that caught the light. She greeted him as though she had been expecting him. Her voice was calm, lower than he imagined, touched with a drawl that lingered on each vowel. "You've come to write about stories," she said. "Most people only come to forget them." Lyle apologized for the intrusion. She smiled, graceful, almost kind, and invited him to stay as her guest. He noted later that the invitation felt rehearsed, like a line she'd spoken many times before. For 3 days he lived in the Burke mansion. During daylight the house seemed almost ordinary, dusty, sun-struck, filled with the smell of cedar and linen. But at night, the character of the place changed. The first night he woke to a distant knocking beneath the floor. 3 beats, a pause, then 2 more. He timed it by his watch, every 43 seconds. He assumed it was pipes, perhaps old water lines expanding in the cold. The second night, the rhythm changed. It answered him. When he knocked once on the wall beside his bed, the sound returned, same strength, same distance, as if it had been waiting for him to try. He wrote, "There is intelligence in the noise." It mimics pattern, not accident. By morning, Evelyn was waiting for him in the dining room. She poured tea without asking questions. When he mentioned the sound, she smiled faintly and said, "Every house keeps memory in its bones, Mr. Lyle. You're only hearing what's left of ours." That evening he explored the lower corridors. Candlelight barely reached the corners. The walls were lined with portraits whose eyes had been scratched away. The air grew cooler near the rear of the hall, where a door stood barred with iron hooks. Beneath it, faintly, came the same rhythm. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. A note pinned to the wood read, "Storage. Do not enter without Miss E's leave." He stepped closer. The smell of iron was stronger there, sharp and wet. When his hand brushed the latch, a breath of cold air pushed through the seam and extinguished his candle. From the darkness below, a single voice whispered his name. He stumbled back, relit the flame, and found the door perfectly still. No movement, no sound. Only a small smear of moisture near the floor, spreading outward like condensation. The following morning he confronted Evelyn about the cellar. Her expression did not change. She said the family used it for preservation, wine, fruit, keepsakes from a better time. Then she added, almost thoughtfully, "It's kind of you to take interest. Most men never notice until it's too late." She offered to show him the lower level that night, once the air cooled. He agreed. In his journal he wrote the last complete passage. "If I am right, the knocking comes from beneath the second staircase. The floorboards there sound hollow. I have asked to see for myself." She consented, though the look in her eyes suggests she already knows what I will find. That evening, rain rolled in from the west. Thunder climbed the valley walls, echoing against the stone foundations. The lamps flickered, but the mansion did not darken. Evelyn had lit candles along the corridors, everyone reflected in a mirror facing another. Dozens of them. Some cracked, some clouded, none showing her reflection clearly. She moved ahead of him down the staircase, lantern swinging. With each step the air grew colder. The knocking resumed, louder now, like a heartbeat underfoot. At the bottom, she turned the key. The iron door groaned open. Lyle smelled damp soil and something older, like metal left to rust in a sealed room. "You wanted the truth," she said. "Listen." The sound that followed was neither mechanical nor human. It was breathing, slow, labored, echoing from every wall, and then, faintly, a whisper. "Stay." Lyle dropped his notebook. The pages scattered across the stone floor. He backed toward the stairs, eyes fixed on the dark beyond her lantern's reach, where movement shifted just enough to suggest form, but not detail. He wrote nothing after that night. The Burke mansion had always been described as alive. But what Thomas Lyle saw that night proved it was also awake. He had followed Evelyn down the stairwell, the lantern's flame barely reaching the curved ceiling. Each step echoed longer than it should have, as though the staircase continued into a space far larger than the cellar could ever be. The air turned thick. Each breath came with effort. When the door closed above them, the sound disappeared completely. No rain, no thunder, just silence. The kind that feels like pressure against your ears. Evelyn stopped near the base of the stairs, raising her lantern. The light trembled across the walls, stone blocks fitted too perfectly, too cleanly. Between them ran veins of something metallic. It wasn't wiring, it pulsed faintly, like veins beneath skin. Lyle asked her what this place was. She didn't answer. She simply turned the lantern toward the far wall, where a narrow wooden door stood half open. The knocking sound came from behind it, regular, steady, measured. He stepped forward. His hand shook when it touched the handle. It felt warm, almost alive. As he pulled, a wave of air escaped the room, carrying the scent of old salt and copper. What he saw inside was never fully written down. His notes end mid-sentence, his handwriting trembling. But the few words that remained were enough to suggest the scale of what he found. Chains on the ceiling. Voices repeating the same plea. Her father's portrait watching. It's breathing with them. Witnesses who later entered the property, before the estate was sealed, spoke of patterns carved into the walls, circles overlapping circles, etched with initials. Some were recent, some were older than the foundation itself. When Evelyn turned to face him, the lantern's reflection no longer caught her eyes. They seemed black, reflective, empty. She spoke as if reciting something memorized long ago. My family learned how to keep the valley fed. Some gave their work, others gave themselves. It's all the same offering in the end. Lyle tried to back away, but the stairs were gone. The steps behind him led only into darkness. The walls seemed closer now, shifting slightly, like breath pushing in and out. The metallic veins pulsed brighter, and the sound of knocking became a single, rhythmic heartbeat. He shouted. The echo came from every direction, but Evelyn's shape no longer stood where she had been. Only her voice remained. You wanted truth, Mr. Lyle. Now you belong to it. A lantern crashed. Glass broke. The flames spread across the floor, but instead of fire, light spilled upward, white and cold, showing outlines of figures along the walls. Dozens of them. Faces blurred, mouths open, their forms half merged with stone. As the light dimmed, their shapes moved, reaching toward him in silence. The next morning, the rain stopped. The townsfolk saw smoke curling from the Burke estate, but no fire to follow. When they entered, the mansion was empty. No Evelyn, no Thomas Lyle, no sound, only his journal, soaked through, resting on the dining table beside a half-full cup of tea. The cellar door was sealed shut, iron hooks melted into place. And still, from beneath the boards, came that faint rhythm. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. When the Burke estate fell silent again, the valley felt it. The orchards remained unpicked. Windows stayed blackened. The gates sagged into the ground. But the memory of that cellar, the memory of the sound that came from beneath it, persisted. Locals began to speak in whispers, though most had long since left. They told stories of men and women who vanished without a trace. Some claimed they saw figures reflected in mirrors that didn't belong to anyone living. Others said the knocking continued at night, echoing through empty rooms, even though no house stood there anymore. Thomas Lyle's journal survived, bound in damp leather, pages warped by rain. The last entries describe Evelyn in the cellar, speaking softly, as if conversing with something older than the mountains themselves. He never described what he saw fully. Only fragments remain, chains on the ceiling, faces in the mirrors. She watches with patience beyond time. No one ever saw Thomas again. Evelyn Burke disappeared shortly afterward. Some say she died in the fire that later consumed the estate. Others claim she left, taking her secrets with her, and that she still wanders the Appalachian hills, waiting for the curious. The valley has never forgotten. Travelers report strange lights where the estate once stood. Farmhands hear knocking in empty barns. Even today, if you follow the old road through High Hollow, you may catch a faint whisper carried on the wind. You shouldn't be here, but now that you are, listen closely. The story of Evelyn Burke became legend, then warning, then something neither fully real nor fully forgotten. And the cellar, its door long gone, remains in memory. A place where curiosity met patience, where the living met what lingered beneath the mountains. Some nights, the valley seems to breathe again, just faintly, as though the earth itself remembers every visitor it ever claimed. And Thomas Lyle, perhaps he did not vanish. Perhaps he is still down there, listening, waiting. The Burke family's history was older than most towns in the Tennessee hills. The mansion that Thomas Lyle had visited was only the latest in a line of estates, built and rebuilt over nearly a century. Silas Burke, Evelyn's father, had inherited not just wealth, but a set of traditions that no outsider could ever fully understand. The family made its fortune in the mines. Coal, iron, and timber fed the valley, and with it, the labor of hundreds of men who depended on the Burkes for their survival. Some say that the wealth was preserved not through hard work alone, but through strict rules, isolation, and the belief that certain offerings were required to maintain the estate's power. Evelyn's mother, Margaret Burke, was a woman steeped in ritual. Letters and journals that survived describe her obsession with preservation, of memory, of wealth, of life itself. She collected rare objects, preserved plants and animals in jars, and spent hours instructing Evelyn in practices meant to protect the family legacy. By the time Evelyn came of age, the mansion had taken on a life of its own. It was no longer simply a house. It was a repository of history, memory, and secrecy. Those who entered the estate felt the weight of generations pressing down, as if the floors themselves had recorded every footstep, every whispered conversation, every unspoken command. Evelyn's fascination with control extended to the men who worked or visited the estate. Letters uncovered decades later reveal invitations that were polite, careful, even charming, but laced with subtle suggestion. Scholars studying the documents note how she preferred educated men, clerks, teachers, clerics, anyone capable of observation, anyone likely to record what they saw. These men never returned home. Townsfolk whispered about the cellar, though few dared speak its name aloud. Some claimed they saw the occasional lantern flicker under the trees at night. Others swore they heard footsteps climbing stairs inside the mansion when no one had entered or left. The final documented disappearance before the estate's first fire was that of a preacher named Jonathan Hale. He had traveled to the valley to speak with the Burkes about the morality of their practices, according to letters sent by his sister. Locals last saw him walking toward the estate, umbrella in hand, before the rain swallowed him. Weeks later, his absence was noted in the church ledger, though the sheriff's report remained sparse, citing unexplained absence. Evelyn herself did not vanish from the records immediately. She was reportedly seen wandering the estate at dusk, carrying lanterns through the hallways, moving mirrors from room to room. One surviving account from a nearby farmer mentions seeing her at the orchard. She was arranging objects on the ground, stones, twigs, and shards of glass, in patterns he could not understand. She looked up and smiled, the farmer wrote years later, and I knew she had seen me before I saw her. The mansion burned in 1910. No official cause was ever recorded. Witnesses described a fire that seemed to start underground, as though the house itself had combusted from below. When the flames died, there were no remains of the Burkes, no bodies recovered, only blackened mirrors that had survived the heat. Decades later, modern visitors to the valley still claim the estate exerts influence. Homes built on the former property report strange occurrences. Mirrors fog without reason, cold spots appear in hallways, and residents hear faint knocking at the same rhythm described in Thomas Lyle's journal. Evelyn Burke's story became legend, a cautionary tale of wealth, obsession, and secrecy. Scholars, folklorists, and paranormal investigators alike have attempted to reconstruct the events of 1907 to 1910. But no account is complete, no testimony unanimous. The mansion may be gone, but its presence remains in memory, and in whispers that echo through the Appalachian hills. Even today, the valley seems to respond when someone speaks her name. Those who dare to investigate report a weight in the air, a pull toward where the cellar once stood. And some claim that, on rare nights, if you stand in the orchard and listen, you can still hear the tapping, 3 knocks, a pause, 2 knocks, and a faint breath that seems older than the mountains themselves. This is the story of Evelyn Burke, heiress, observer, orchestrator, a woman who ruled her valley quietly, yet whose presence remains, even when her house, her family, and the men she lured are gone. What truly happened in the cellar may never be known, but the valley remembers, and those who listen closely can still hear it, waiting. The Burke estate may have burned more than a century ago, but the valley still keeps its memory. Modern travelers tell stories that echo Thomas Lyle's journal. Explorers claim that when the fog rolls in across High Hollow, the ground seems to move beneath their feet. Mirrors left in abandoned cabins along the ridge have been reported to cloud suddenly, even when the air is dry. Some say reflections shift, showing shapes that aren't there. Others swear they hear knocking beneath the floorboards, the same rhythm described by witnesses in 1907. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. Repeating, patient, deliberate. Locals avoid the area after dark. One resident recounted seeing a figure walking along the ridge, carrying a lantern, its light swaying but revealing nothing beneath the hood of a coat that looked impossibly old. By the time he blinked, the figure had vanished, leaving only the soft echo of steps behind him. Historians call it folklore. Psychologists dismiss it as suggestion, but even skeptics hesitate when asked about High Hollow after sunset. They speak quietly, eyes shifting to the hills. Something about the valley itself insists you remember. Evelyn Burke, her family, and the cellar that no longer exists still matters. Some claim that if you find the right slope, the right tree line, and the fog thickens just so, you can hear it. The echo of those who were brought beneath the house, voices that whisper your name, the faintest scrape of metal, the rhythm of someone or something listening waiting. "It's not the house that remembers," one hiker reportedly said. "It's her." She never left. Even now, when wind rattles a window or knocks echo in empty halls, you might wonder if Evelyn Burke's legacy has survived beyond mirrors, beyond pages of journals, beyond memory itself. And the truth remains just out of reach. Would you dare visit what remains of High Hollow? Would you step where the valley still listens? If you're still watching, you're braver than most. And perhaps a part of you already hears it.